He was just a human janitor, until the sacred stones lit up under his broom. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. The massive space station Nexus 7 hung like a jeweled pendant against the void, its crystalline spires reflecting the light of 3 nearby stars. Within its labyrinthine corridors, Miles Harper pushed his cleaning cart forward, just another forgotten human in a galaxy that had long since moved beyond his kind. Sector 12, Upper Concourse. Maintain optimal sanitation protocols, droned the automated work dispatcher in Miles' earpiece. The mechanical voice was the closest thing he had to a conversation most days. Miles sighed, checking his antiquated tablet that displayed his cleaning assignments. The upper concourse contained the Galactic Council chambers and the sacred meditation halls of the Vestian Order, spaces where humans were typically forbidden except for maintenance duties. At 42 years old, with graying temples and permanent creases around his eyes, Miles had spent the last 15 years cleaning up after beings who barely acknowledged his existence. As he guided his cart through the station's service corridors, his thoughts drifted to Earth. The once proud homeworld of humanity now served primarily as a tourist destination and natural preserve. After humanity's disastrous first attempts at interstellar diplomacy centuries ago, they'd been relegated to the galactic equivalent of the children's table, tolerated but rarely taken seriously. Human worker, you have entered a secure zone. State your purpose, demanded a towering Tauran security officer, his forearms crossed imposingly across his armored chest. Miles held up his work badge with practiced patience. Scheduled maintenance. Cleaning service for the Hall of Contemplation. The Tauran's upper eyes narrowed while his lower pair scanned a holographic display. Proceed. Ensure you disturb nothing. The Vestian delegation arrives tomorrow for the Grand Conclave. Wouldn't dream of it, Miles muttered, pushing his cart forward after the security barrier dissolved. The Hall of Contemplation was unlike any other chamber on the station. Circular in design with a vaulted ceiling that simulated the night sky of the Vestian homeworld, the hall was lined with what appeared to be ordinary stone tiles. But Miles knew better. These were the famed Vestian sacred stones, artifacts supposedly containing the accumulated wisdom of their species' thousand-year history. According to station gossip, only the highest-ranking Vestian priests could activate the stones, using them to commune with their ancestors during important decision-making processes. To everyone else, they were simply exquisitely crafted floor tiles that required special cleaning agents and careful attention. Miles prepared his specialized cleaning equipment. The Vestians had specific requirements. Only purified water from their homeworld's glaciers, applied with natural fiber brooms made from a particular plant that grew in their sacred groves. The whole process seemed unnecessarily complicated to Miles, but he'd learned long ago that questioning alien customs only led to trouble. At least they don't shed like the Canopians, he said to himself, thinking of the fur-covered diplomats whose meeting rooms required 3 hours of vacuuming after each session. Working methodically, Miles dipped his specialized broom into the purified water and began the careful process of cleaning the sacred stones. The task required a specific pattern, circular motions, moving outward from the center of the chamber. The work was tedious but oddly meditative. For nearly an hour, the only sound was the soft swish of bristles against stone. As he approached the eastern section of the chamber, Miles felt a strange vibration through the handle of his broom. Dismissing it as fatigue, he continued his work. But when he passed the broom over a particular stone, one that appeared slightly darker than the others, a faint blue glow emanated from beneath the bristles. Miles froze. In 15 years of cleaning this chamber, he'd never seen anything like this. He cautiously moved the broom away, and the glow faded. When he passed it over the stone again, the blue light returned, slightly brighter. That can't be right, he whispered, looking around nervously. If he'd damaged one of the sacred stones, he'd lose his job at minimum, or face diplomatic sanctions at worst. Hesitantly, Miles knelt down and examined the stone more closely. It appeared undamaged, its surface still bearing the intricate, almost invisible etchings that all the sacred stones possessed. Acting on instinct, he reached out and touched the stone with his bare hand. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The stone blazed with brilliant blue light, and every other sacred stone in the chamber began to glow in response, creating a dazzling network of luminescence across the floor. The light pulsed rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat, growing brighter with each cycle. Miles tried to pull his hand away, but found he couldn't move. A strange tingling sensation spread up his arm and throughout his body. The chamber's simulated night sky ceiling suddenly shifted, the stars rearranging themselves into unfamiliar patterns. "This is really bad," Miles gasped, his heart racing as panic set in. The light was now bright enough to be visible from the corridor outside. It would only be moments before security noticed. Just as this thought crossed his mind, the doors to the chamber slid open, and 3 Tarn'eth security officers burst in, weapons drawn. "Step away from the sacred stones," the lead officer bellowed, his 4 arms each gripping a different weapon. "I can't," Miles shouted back, still unable to break contact with the glowing stone. "I'm stuck." The security officers advanced cautiously, their expressions a mixture of anger and confusion. The lead officer raised his communicator. "Alert the High Chamberlain. We have a human defiling the sacred stones. And contact the Vestian embassy immediately." Miles wanted to protest, to explain that this was all a terrible accident, but before he could speak, a new sensation overwhelmed him. Information, vast quantities of it, began flooding into his mind. Images, concepts, languages, mathematical formulas, histories of civilizations he'd never heard of, all pouring into his consciousness like water through a broken dam. He gasped, eyes wide, as knowledge spanning thousands of years and hundreds of species cascaded through his thoughts. The pain was excruciating, like his skull was being split open from the inside, but he remained conscious, processing information at an impossible rate. Through the haze of pain and information overload, Miles became vaguely aware of more people entering the chamber. Tall, willowy figures with luminescent skin, Vestians. They moved with a grace that seemed almost liquid, their expressions of shock visible even through his pain-blurred vision. "Impossible," one of them whispered in their musical language, which Miles suddenly understood perfectly. "The stones have never responded to any non-Vestian being." "It must be a malfunction," another said. "Or sabotage." The oldest Vestian, wearing elaborate robes that marked him as a high priest, stepped forward cautiously. "No, look at the pattern of illumination. The stones are in harmony. This is no malfunction." He studied Miles with newfound interest. "This human has awakened the ancestral knowledge." The security officers looked to the Vestians for guidance, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Shall we remove him by force, Eminence?" the lead officer asked. The high priest raised a 6-fingered hand. "No, that could be dangerous, for him and for the stones. We must understand what is happening here." Just as the priest finished speaking, the light from the stones pulsed one final time, blindingly bright, then faded to a soft glow. Miles felt the connection break, and he collapsed forward, catching himself on his hands and knees, gasping for breath. The chamber fell silent except for Miles' ragged breathing. The sacred stones continued to emit a faint light, something the Vestians stared at in obvious astonishment. "The stones remain active," the high priest murmured, looking from the glowing floor to Miles with growing wonder. Even without direct contact, Miles slowly sat back on his heels, his mind reeling from the experience. The flood of information had stopped, but he could still feel it all there, organized and accessible in his mind like files in a database. Languages, histories, sciences, technologies, knowledge spanning millennia and thousands of species. "What just happened?" he managed to ask, his voice hoarse. The high priest approached and knelt before him, bringing them to eye level, a gesture of profound respect that wasn't lost on the security officers, who exchanged shocked glances. "You have done what no non-Vestian has ever done," the priest said softly. You have awakened the ancestral archive and taken its knowledge into yourself. Miles blinked, trying to process this. But I'm just the janitor, he said weakly. A slight smile curved the priest's thin lips. Apparently, you are much more than that. Within hours, news of the incident had spread throughout Nexus 7. Miles found himself whisked from the Hall of Contemplation to a secure medical facility, where teams of doctors from various species examined him while Vestian priests looked on with intense interest. His neural activity is off the charts, a Solarian doctor reported, her bioluminescent skin pulsing with excitement as she reviewed the scan results. Brain regions that are typically dormant in humans are fully active. The ancestral knowledge seeks compatible neural pathways, the High Priest, who had introduced himself as Elder Thaler, explained. It is adapting to his human physiology. Miles sat on the examination table, feeling like a specimen under a microscope. Can someone please explain what this ancestral knowledge actually is? He asked. Elder Thaler gestured for the medical team to give them space. When they were relatively alone, he spoke in a reverent tone. The sacred stones contain the accumulated knowledge, memories, and wisdom of our greatest minds throughout Vestian history. For 10,000 years, our wisest leaders and scholars have committed their life's learning to the stones before death. We use this repository to guide our decisions and maintain continuity of knowledge. So I've got 10,000 years of Vestian Wikipedia in my head now. Miles asked. The elder's expression showed confusion at the reference, then understanding. It is far more than mere information. You have their experiences, their insights, perhaps even aspects of their consciousness. And something unprecedented has occurred. The stones have never shared their knowledge with a non-Vestian. He paused, studying Miles intently. There must be something unique about you. Miles laughed bitterly. I'm about as ununique as they come. I'm a human janitor on a station where humans are barely tolerated. Perhaps that is precisely what makes you unique, a new voice said. Miles turned to see a human woman entering the medical bay. She wore the formal attire of the Earth Diplomatic Corps, her posture radiating authority despite her small stature compared to the aliens around her. Ambassador Lauren Bennett. She introduced herself, extending a hand to Miles. Earth Central sent me as soon as they heard about the incident. Miles shook her hand, noting the firm grip. Miles Harper. Station maintenance. Not anymore, I think, she said with a slight smile before turning to Elder Thaler. The Galactic Council is convening an emergency session. Your presence is requested, Elder, and Mr. Harper's as well. The Elder nodded solemnly. Of course, this development requires careful consideration. As they made their way to the council chambers, Miles became increasingly aware of the stares directed his way. Aliens who would have ignored him completely yesterday now tracked his movements with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright fear. They're calling you the knowledge bearer, Ambassador Bennett said quietly as they walked. Word spreads fast on a station this size. Great, Miles muttered. Yesterday, I was invisible. Today, I'm a sideshow attraction. The ambassador gave him a sympathetic look. This could be a significant opportunity for humanity, Mr. Harper. Our standing in the galactic community has been tenuous at best since the Proxima incident. Miles nodded. Every human knew about the Proxima incident, humanity's first disastrous contact with the Tauran hegemony that had nearly led to interstellar war and resulted in severe restrictions on human expansion and technology development. I'm not sure how me accidentally triggering some alien artifacts changes anything, Miles said. The Vestian Ancestral Archive is one of the most revered and protected knowledge repositories in known space, Ambassador Bennett explained. The fact that it responded to you, a human, contradicts centuries of Vestian claims about their unique connection to the stones. It has political implications. Before Miles could respond, they arrived at the massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber. Unlike his usual entrance through service corridors, Miles was now walking through the main doors, flanked by a human ambassador and a Vestian high priest. The council chamber was a vast amphitheater, with concentric rings of seating surrounding a central speaking platform. Representatives from hundreds of species filled the seats, their combined murmuring creating a cacophony of sound that immediately hushed as Miles entered. The council arbiter, a towering meridian with crystalline skin that refracted light in dazzling patterns, called for order. This emergency session of the Galactic Council is now convened. We are here to address the unprecedented activation of the Vestian Ancestral Archive by a human maintenance worker. Miles winced at the description, but kept his expression neutral as he was directed to a seat near the central platform. For the next hour, he listened as various council representatives debated the implications of what had happened. The Vestian delegation, led by a senior diplomat, seemed genuinely conflicted, torn between outrage at the breach of their sacred artifacts and fascination with the unprecedented response of the stones. Our theologians have always taught that only those with Vestian blood could commune with the ancestors, the Vestian diplomat explained. This human's ability to access the archive challenges fundamental aspects of our understanding. The Tauran representative, a heavily decorated military officer, took a more suspicious view. How do we know this wasn't an orchestrated human attempt to steal Vestian knowledge? Their history of technological espionage is well documented. Ambassador Bennett rose to respond. With respect, the human in question is a maintenance worker with no connection to Earth intelligence services. He has been employed on this station for 15 years with an exemplary record. This was clearly an unexpected phenomenon, not an espionage attempt. As the debate continued, Miles found himself drawing on the newly acquired knowledge in his mind. He began to understand the complex political relationships between the council members, the historical contexts of their arguments, even details of treaties and agreements that had never been made public to humans. When the Solarian representative suggested that Miles be taken to the Vestian homeworld for further study, a thinly veiled imprisonment, he decided he couldn't remain silent any longer. "If I may address the council," Miles said, standing before anyone could acknowledge him. The chamber fell silent, all eyes turning to him. The arbiter hesitated, then nodded. "The human may speak." Miles stepped onto the central platform, feeling strangely calm despite the hundreds of alien eyes fixed upon him. "My name is Miles Harper," he began. "Until yesterday, I was just a janitor on this station. I've spent 15 years cleaning your meeting rooms, maintaining your living quarters, and keeping your facilities operational. I've been essentially invisible to most of you." He paused, looking around the chamber. "I understand your concerns. Something unprecedented has happened, and it involves one of the most sacred artifacts in the galaxy. But I want to be clear about one thing. I didn't ask for this." Miles tapped his temple. "However, now that I have this knowledge, I'm beginning to understand things I never could have imagined. For instance, I now know that the Vestian sacred stones weren't originally Vestian at all." A shocked murmur ran through the chamber. The Vestian representatives looked particularly disturbed. "According to the knowledge I've received, the stones were created by a species called the predecessors, who disappeared from this galaxy over 50,000 years ago. The Vestians discovered them 15,000 years ago and learned to use them, but they were never intended to be species-specific." Elder Thaler stepped forward, his expression a mixture of alarm and fascination. "How could you possibly know this? Even among our people, the origin of the stones is known only to the highest echelons of our priesthood." Miles smiled sadly. "Because your ancestors knew it, Elder. And now somehow I know it too. The stones were designed to share knowledge across species barriers. The fact that only Vestians could access them until now wasn't by design. It was a limitation, perhaps even a malfunction." The council chamber erupted in voices. The arbiter had to strike their crystalline staff against the floor 3 times to restore order. "These are extraordinary claims," the arbiter said once quiet returned. "Do you have evidence to support them?" "I can prove it," Miles said confidently. "The knowledge in my mind includes the original activation sequences for the stones, protocols that were lost even to the Vestians millennia ago. If you allow me to demonstrate, I believe I can show that the stones can be accessed by any sentient being, not just Vestians or humans." The Vestian delegation conferred hurriedly among themselves before Elder Thaler stepped forward again. The human speaks of matters known only to our highest circles, he admitted reluctantly. While we cannot confirm his claims about the predecessors without further investigation, the fact that he knows of such closely guarded secrets lends credibility to his words. The debate raged for hours after that. Some council members saw Miles as a threat to the established order, others as an opportunity to access long-lost knowledge. Through it all, Miles sat quietly, occasionally consulting with Ambassador Bennett or Elder Thaler. Finally, as the station's artificial day cycle began to wane, the council reached a decision. Miles Harper of Earth, the Arbiter announced, you will be granted diplomatic status and placed under the joint protection of Earth and Vestia. You will be permitted to demonstrate your claims regarding the sacred stones under controlled conditions. If your assertions prove correct, the Council will reconvene to discuss the implications. As the session adjourned, Ambassador Bennett leaned close to Miles. That went better than I expected. The Vestians could have demanded your immediate extradition. Miles nodded, feeling the weight of his new reality settling onto his shoulders. What happens now? Now, she said with a grim smile. We prepare for your demonstration. Because if you're wrong about being able to activate those stones for others, we're both in very deep trouble. Back in his small station quarters, now guarded by both human and Vestian security personnel, Miles sat on the edge of his bed, head in his hands. The events of the day seemed surreal, like a dream he couldn't wake from. His door chimed, and he looked up to see Elder Thaler entering, his willowy frame seeming too tall for the modest human-sized room. I hope I'm not disturbing you, the elder said, his melodic voice gentle. Not at all, Miles replied, gesturing to the room's only chair. Though I'm not sure that's designed for Vestian anatomy. The elder smiled and remained standing. I wanted to speak with you privately, away from the council and diplomats. Miles nodded, waiting. What you said about the origins of the stones, Thaler began cautiously. It aligns with certain heretical theories that have existed among some of our scholars for generations. Theories that our religious authorities have suppressed. Because they challenged the Vestian claim of being chosen by the ancestors, Miles finished for him. Yes. The elder's luminescent skin dimmed slightly, indicating distress in Vestian physiology. If what you claim is true, if the stones were meant for all sentient beings, it would fundamentally alter Vestian society and our place in the galactic community. Miles stood and paced the small room. I understand why that's frightening. But isn't truth important to your people? Truth is sacred, Thaler agreed. But so is stability. For 10,000 years, the sacred stones have been the foundation of our governance, our laws, our very identity as a species. And they still can be, Miles said earnestly. Nothing about this changes the wisdom your ancestors stored in the stones. It just means that wisdom was meant to be shared more widely. The elder studied him for a long moment. You are not what I expected, Miles Harper. Believe me, I never expected any of this either, Miles said with a wry smile. Yesterday, my biggest concern was whether the cleaning drones in Sector 7 needed maintenance. And now you carry the accumulated knowledge of thousands of Vestian sages, Thaler mused. The universe has a curious sense of humor. That it does, Miles agreed. So, will you help me with tomorrow's demonstration? The knowledge is in my head, but I could use guidance from someone who understands Vestian traditions. The elder hesitated, then nodded. Yes. Whatever the outcome, this moment in history should be approached with reverence and care. He moved toward the door, then paused. One more question, if I may. What does it feel like to carry all that knowledge? Miles considered the question carefully. It's like having a vast library where I can access any book instantly. The information doesn't overwhelm me anymore. It's just there when I need it. But there's something else too. He paused, searching for words. I can feel the personalities behind the knowledge, the curiosity, the wisdom, the hopes of those who contributed to it. They're like echoes. Thaler's eyes widened. You experience the essence of the contributors? That is precisely how our high priest described communion with the ancestors. Then maybe humans and Vestians aren't so different after all, Miles suggested. The elder nodded thoughtfully before departing, leaving Miles alone with his thoughts and the ancient wisdom now residing in his mind. The next morning, a delegation including council representatives, Vestian priests, and security personnel gathered in the Hall of Contemplation. The sacred stones still emitted a faint glow, pulsing gently like a collective heartbeat. Miles stood in the center of the chamber, Ambassador Bennett and Elder Thaler flanking him. The tension in the room was palpable. I will now demonstrate the original activation protocol for the sacred stones, Miles announced, his voice steady despite his nerves. According to the knowledge I've received, this should allow any sentient being to access at least the outer layers of the ancestral wisdom. He knelt and placed his palms on two specific stones, then began to speak in ancient Vestian, a language so old that even the Vestian delegates needed the translation devices they typically used for interspecies communication. Guardians of memory, keepers of wisdom, recognize all who seek knowledge with pure intent. As the predecessors intended, let barriers of flesh and form fall away. Knowledge belongs to all who would use it wisely. The stones beneath his hands flared brilliantly, and the pattern of illumination spread across the floor in complex, geometric patterns never before seen by the Vestians. The light shifted through colors, blue to green to violet to a warm gold that bathed the chamber in a gentle glow. Miles stood and gestured to Elder Thaler. "Elder, would you join me?" The priest stepped forward hesitantly. "Now," Miles continued, "I ask a non-Vestian to join us as well." He looked to the diverse delegation. "Who volunteers?" After a moment's hesitation, a Tarn'eth diplomat stepped forward. The massive four-armed being looked distinctly uncomfortable but determined. "Place your hands here and here," Miles instructed them both, indicating specific stones that pulsed with golden light. When both the Vestian and the Tarn'eth had positioned themselves, Miles placed his own hands on a third stone, completing a triangle. "Open your minds," he said softly. "The knowledge is there, waiting." For several tense moments, nothing seemed to happen. Then Elder Thaler gasped, his luminescent skin brightening dramatically. "By the first ancestors," he whispered, "I can see patterns I never knew existed. Mathematical principles that explain the very fabric of space-time." The Tarn'eth diplomat's four eyes widened simultaneously. "Stellar cartography," he rumbled in his deep voice. "Star charts from before our species achieved spaceflight." "Impossible." Murmurs spread through the watching delegation as it became clear that both non-humans were accessing information from the stones. "The stones are responding to them," one of the Vestian priests said in awe. "Just as they respond to us." Miles smiled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. As they were always meant to. Over the following days, carefully monitored tests confirmed what Miles had demonstrated. The sacred stones could indeed be accessed by any sentient species, though the depth and type of knowledge available seemed to vary based on individual aptitude and intent. The Galactic Council reconvened a week after the initial incident. This time, Miles was invited to address them not as a curiosity, but as the officially recognized knowledge bearer, a title hastily created to acknowledge his unique status. "Honored representatives," he began, standing confidently on the central platform. "The discoveries of the past week have profound implications for all our civilizations. The predecessors who created these knowledge repositories did so with the intention of sharing wisdom across species barriers, across time itself." He gestured to where Elder Thaler sat with the Vestian delegation. "The Vestians have been faithful custodians of this gift for millennia, preserving it when they believed it was meant for them alone. That dedication deserves our respect and gratitude." The Vestian representatives inclined their heads in acknowledgement, seeming relieved that Miles wasn't challenging their past claims. "But now we face a new reality," Miles continued. "The ancestral knowledge was meant to be shared, and from what I've learned, the sacred stones on Nexus 7 are not unique. Similar repositories exist throughout the galaxy, waiting to be rediscovered and reactivated." This statement caused an immediate stir among the council members. The possibilities and potential disruptions were enormous. I proposed the formation of a new interspecies initiative, Miles said once the murmuring subsided. A collaborative effort to locate these knowledge repositories, study them, and share their wisdom for the benefit of all galactic citizens. The debate that followed was intense, but remarkably constructive. Even species with historical animosities found common ground in the pursuit of ancient knowledge. By the session's end, the Council had approved the formation of the predecessor Knowledge Initiative, with joint leadership shared between humans, Vestians, and 3 other major galactic powers. As the session adjourned, Ambassador Bennett approached Miles with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Do you realize what you've accomplished?" she asked. "Humanity has been fighting for equal standing in galactic affairs for centuries. You've just elevated our entire species in a single week." Miles shrugged, still uncomfortable with his new prominence. "I was just in the right place at the right time. Or the wrong place at the wrong time, depending on how you look at it. Either way," she said, "Earth Central is impressed. They're offering you an official position, special envoy to the predecessor Knowledge Initiative, with diplomatic rank and benefits to match." Miles raised his eyebrows. "That's quite a promotion from Janitor." "Well," Ambassador Bennett said with a smile, "you did clean up quite a mess." As they walked from the council chamber, Miles found Elder Thaler waiting for them. "Knowledge Bearer." The Elder greeted him formally. "The Vestian Conclave has reached a decision regarding your status. We would be honored if you would accept the title of Honorary Sage of the Ancestral Order, a position never before offered to a non-Vestian." Miles looked between the human ambassador and the Vestian Elder, suddenly overwhelmed by how dramatically his life had changed. "I'm honored by both offers," he said sincerely, "but I need some time to think." Later that evening, Miles found himself back in the Hall of Contemplation, now empty except for a few Vestian acolytes who bowed respectfully as he entered. The sacred stones still glowed softly, responding to his presence. He knelt in the center of the chamber, placing one hand on the stone that had first activated for him. Immediately, he felt the connection, the vast repository of knowledge opening to him like a familiar book. But this time, he didn't seek information. Instead, he directed his thoughts inward, to the echoes of the ancient personalities whose knowledge he now carried. "I don't know if you can hear me," he thought, "or if this is just me talking to myself, but I could use some guidance. I was nobody, just a human janitor. Now I'm supposed to help guide relations between species that have been in conflict for centuries." To his surprise, he felt a response, not in words, but in impressions, emotions, flashes of insight from countless lives lived long ago. The message wasn't direct advice, but rather a reminder. Wisdom came in many forms, from many sources. Sometimes the most important perspectives came from those who observed from the margins, who saw what others overlooked. Like a janitor, who noticed what others walked right past. Miles opened his eyes, a slow smile spreading across his face. He understood now why the stones had chosen him. Not because he was special, but because he wasn't, because he represented the overlooked, the underestimated. Because sometimes the most profound wisdom came from the most unexpected sources. He stood, nodding to the Vestian acolytes as he left the chamber. He had decisions to make, roles to accept, and a galaxy of knowledge to help share. But for now, he was content with the understanding that had come to him. He had been just a human janitor, until the sacred stones lit up under his broom. And that was exactly why he had been the right person, in the right place, at exactly the right time. 3 months after the incident in the Hall of Contemplation, Miles found himself standing on the observation deck of the Vestian flagship Radiant Thought, watching as the massive vessel approached a planet he'd never thought he would see, Vestia Prime, the ancestral homeworld of the beings whose knowledge now resided in his mind. "Quite a view, isn't it?" Ambassador Bennett asked, joining him at the viewport. "Most humans never get to see this, you know. Vestian immigration protocols are notoriously strict." Miles nodded, taking in the sight of the planet below. Unlike Earth with its blues and greens, Vestia Prime shimmered in shades of amber and deep purple, its atmosphere refracting light in a way that created a perpetual golden haze around the planet. "It's beautiful," he said simply, "though I suppose I should have expected that, given what I know about Vestian aesthetics now." In the months since the sacred stones had activated for him, Miles had adjusted to his new role as both Earth's special envoy and an honorary Vestian sage. The transition from maintenance worker to diplomat hadn't been easy. He still sometimes reached for a cleaning tool when entering a new room, a habit formed over 15 years that wasn't easily broken. But the knowledge in his mind had proven invaluable, not just to the newly formed predecessor knowledge initiative, but to his personal adaptation as well. He now spoke 12 alien languages fluently, understood the complex protocols of interstellar diplomacy, and could navigate the labyrinthine politics of the Galactic Council with surprising skill. "The Vestian High Conclave is assembling for your arrival," Ambassador Bennett said, checking her datapad. "It's unprecedented. They rarely convene for off-worlders." Miles sighed. "I know. Elder Thaler made that very clear during our last communication. The pressure to perform is considerable." Bennett gave him a sympathetic look. "Second thoughts about accepting the position?" "Sometimes," Miles admitted. "I was good at being a janitor, 15 years without a single complaint. This," he gestured vaguely around them. "This is different. The stakes are so much higher. That's why you're perfect for it," Bennett said firmly. "You're not a career diplomat or a political appointee. You're just a human janitor," Miles finished with a wry smile. "So everyone keeps reminding me." "I was going to say authentic," Bennett corrected him. "The Vestians value that. So do most species when it comes down to it." Their conversation was interrupted by the ship's announcement system. "Attention, all personnel. Preparing for atmospheric entry to Vestia Prime. Please secure all belongings and proceed to designated arrival stations." Miles took one last look at the golden planet before turning away from the viewport. Time to face the music. The Vestian capital city of luminous harmony spread across the landscape like an elaborate work of art. Buildings of crystal and a pearlescent material unique to Vestia rose in graceful spirals and arches, connected by elevated walkways that curved and flowed like frozen rivers. The architecture seemed to defy gravity, structures balancing on impossibly narrow bases or hanging from slender support columns that looked too delicate to bear their weight. As their diplomatic shuttle descended toward the Grand Conclave building, a massive dome structure at the city's center, Miles noted the crowds gathering in the open plazas below. News of his arrival had clearly spread, and the Vestian public was curious about the human who had connected with their sacred artifacts. "Remember, there will be a formal welcoming ceremony, then a private meeting with the High Conclave, followed by the public address," Ambassador Bennett reminded him. "Stick to the talking points we rehearsed." Miles nodded, though they both knew he had perfect recall of the diplomatic briefs thanks to the ancestral knowledge enhancement of his memory. The reminder was more about calming his nerves than refreshing his memory. The shuttle landed on a crystalline platform that shimmered with welcome lights, a high honor in Vestian culture. As the door opened, Miles took a deep breath and stepped out into the amber light of Vestia Prime. A delegation of Vestian officials awaited them, led by Elder Thaler, who had traveled ahead to prepare for their arrival. The elder stepped forward and performed the formal greeting gesture, a slow, graceful movement of all 6 fingers of both hands that symbolized the opening of mind and spirit. "Knowledge-bearer Miles Harper," Thaler said, using his formal title. "Vestia welcomes you as friend, scholar, and bridge between worlds." Miles returned the gesture with the precision of someone who had practiced extensively. "Elder Thaler, I come with respect for your world and gratitude for your welcome." The formal pleasantries continued as they proceeded into the Grand Conclave building. Miles was acutely aware of the Vestians lining the route, their luminescent skin glowing with excitement or curiosity as they caught sight of him. Most had never seen a human in person before. The welcoming ceremony passed in a blur of ritual speeches and symbolic exchanges. Miles performed his part flawlessly, drawing on the ancestral knowledge to navigate the complex cultural requirements. But his mind was already on the next, more crucial meeting, his private audience with the High Conclave, the 12 most powerful Vestians in the galaxy. When the time came, Miles was escorted to a chamber deep within the Conclave building. Unlike the grand, open spaces of the public areas, this room was intimate and ancient. The walls appeared to be natural stone rather than the crystalline materials used elsewhere, and embedded within them were sacred stones similar to those on Nexus 7, glowing with a soft light that pulsed in rhythm with Miles' heartbeat. The 12 members of the High Conclave sat in a semicircle, their ceremonial robes shimmering with embedded light patterns that signified their ranks and specialties. Elder Thaler joined them, taking his place as the 13th member, the voice of the ancients, a position Miles now understood was reserved for the Vestian most attuned to the sacred stones. Miles Harper of Earth, the High Speaker began, her voice melodic even by Vestian standards. For 10,000 years, no non-Vestian has entered this chamber. Your presence here is testament to the unprecedented nature of recent events. Miles bowed his head respectfully. I am honored by the exception, High Speaker. Not an exception, she corrected gently. A restoration. If what you have revealed is true, then this chamber was never meant to be restricted to Vestians alone. Miles could feel the weight of history in the room, not just in the ancient stones, but in the gravity of the moment. What happened here would reshape Vestian society and, potentially, galactic politics for generations to come. You carry within you the wisdom of our ancestors, the High Speaker continued. But we must know, how has this changed you? A human mind was never designed to contain such knowledge. Are you still Miles Harper, or has the ancestral wisdom overwhelmed your original self? It was a profound question, and one Miles had asked himself many times over the past months. I am still myself, he said after a thoughtful pause. The knowledge is there, accessible when I need it, but it hasn't replaced who I am. In fact, I believe that's by design. The predecessors who created the sacred stones wanted them to enhance understanding, not override identity. He tapped his temple. In here, I still have memories of growing up in Seattle, of my first job repairing droids in the city center, of my decision to take the off-world maintenance contract that brought me to Nexus 7. Those experiences shape how I interpret and use the ancestral knowledge. The Conclave members exchanged glances, their skin tones shifting slightly in what Miles now recognized as silent communication. This matches our historical understanding, one of the elder Conclave members said. Our earliest records speak of the stones as wisdom amplifiers, not replacements for personal experience. Which brings us to why we have summoned you here, the High Speaker said. We face a decision unprecedented in our history. For millennia, we have believed that only Vestians could access the ancestral wisdom. This belief has shaped our governance, our diplomacy, even our spiritual practices. Elder Thaler leaned forward. What the knowledge bearer has demonstrated, what our own experiences with the stones have now confirmed, challenges the foundation of that belief. The question before us is how to proceed. If I may, Miles said carefully, the ancestral knowledge suggests that the predecessors intended these repositories to foster cooperation between species, not separation. He placed his hand on one of the stones embedded in the chamber wall. It brightened at his touch, and the other stones responded in kind, creating a network of light that spread across the walls. The predecessors believed that different species perceive reality in unique ways. Miles continued, drawing on the ancient wisdom flowing through his mind. They created the stones not just to preserve knowledge, but to share perspectives across biological and cultural boundaries. They understood that the greatest insights often come from the intersection of different viewpoints. The High Speaker's expression was unreadable, but her skin glowed with an intensity that suggested deep emotion. And what would you have us do with this understanding, Miles Harper? Our society has been built around our role as sole custodians of the ancestral wisdom. Not sole custodians, Miles corrected gently. First custodians. The Vestians were the first to discover and preserve these gifts. That doesn't diminish your achievement, it elevates it. You protected this knowledge until the galaxy was ready to share it. A murmur ran through the conclave members, their skin tones shifting in complex patterns. And you believe the galaxy is ready now? The High Speaker asked. Miles considered the question seriously. Ready? Perhaps not entirely, but facing challenges that require shared wisdom more than ever. The Tauran expansionism, the Solarian energy crisis, the disputed territories in the Antares sector. These are problems that affect all spacefaring species, yet we approach them from isolated perspectives. He gestured to the glowing stones. The predecessors faced similar challenges 50,000 years ago. Their solution wasn't to elevate one species above others, but to create tools for sharing knowledge across boundaries. The High Speaker rose from her seat, approaching Miles with deliberate steps. The other conclave members watched in silence as she stood before him, studying his face. There is wisdom in your words, Miles Harper, she said finally. Wisdom that echoes what some among us have long suspected but feared to voice. If we accept this new understanding, Vestian society must change in fundamental ways. Change can be frightening, Miles acknowledged, but it can also be an opportunity. The ancestral knowledge doesn't diminish what makes Vestians unique, it highlights it. Your people were chosen as the first custodians because of your natural aptitudes for preservation and careful study. Those qualities will be even more valuable in an era of shared knowledge. The High Speaker turned to address the conclave. Members of the High Conclave, I believe we must consider a new path forward. One that honors our past while embracing a more inclusive future. The discussion that followed lasted for hours, with Miles answering questions and offering insights drawn from both the ancestral knowledge and his uniquely human perspective. Some conclave members were resistant, clinging to traditional interpretations of Vestian exceptionalism. Others embraced the new understanding with surprising enthusiasm. As the debate continued, Miles found himself drawing on skills he developed not as a diplomat, but as a maintenance worker. Patience, careful observation, and the ability to identify the root cause of problems rather than just their symptoms. He listened more than he spoke, understanding that this was ultimately a decision the Vestians needed to make for themselves. Finally, as Vestia Prime's twin moons rose outside the ancient chamber, the High Speaker called for a formal vote. The High Conclave has reached a consensus, she announced after all 12 members had indicated their decisions. Vestia will embrace its role not as sole guardians of the ancestral wisdom, but as senior partners in a new galactic initiative to share this knowledge responsibly among all sentient species. She turned to Miles. Knowledge-bearer, we ask that you serve as liaison between Vestia and the other worlds in this endeavor. Your unique position, carrying our ancestral wisdom within a human mind, makes you ideally suited to bridge our different perspectives. Miles bowed deeply. I would be honored, High Speaker. The following day, Miles stood before a vast assembly of Vestians gathered in the Grand Plaza outside the Conclave building. Thousands of willowy figures with luminescent skin filled the open space, their attention fixed on the humans standing at the center of their sacred governmental site. Ambassador Bennett and Elder Thaler flanked him as he prepared to address the public. Behind them stood representatives from 12 other galactic species, hastily assembled to witness this historic moment. Citizens of Vestia, Miles began, his voice amplified by subtle technology embedded in the plaza floor. For 10,000 years, your people have been faithful custodians of a great gift, the ancestral wisdom preserved in the sacred stones. That dedication and care has ensured that knowledge spanning millennia has survived to the present day. He paused, looking out at the sea of Vestian faces. Yesterday, your High Conclave made a momentous decision to share that gift with the galaxy, as the predecessors who created the stones originally intended. This decision was not made lightly, nor does it diminish Vestia's special relationship with the ancestral wisdom. Rather, it elevates your role from sole guardians to teachers and guides. Miles gestured to the diverse representatives behind him. These diplomats represent the first partner species in what will be known as the Concordance of Shared Wisdom. Under Vestian guidance, they will learn to access the knowledge repositories on their own worlds, stones similar to your own that have laid dormant for millennia, waiting for the right moment to reawaken. The plaza was utterly silent as the Vestians absorbed his words. Then, slowly, a gentle glow began to spread through the crowd as thousands of Vestians shifted their skin luminescence in the cultural expression of collective approval. Elder Thaler stepped forward. For generations, we have taught that the ancestral wisdom was a gift meant for Vestians alone. We now understand that this was an incomplete truth. The wisdom was entrusted to us first because we were ready first, ready to preserve it until the galaxy had matured enough for wider sharing. The elder gestured to Miles. It took a human, a species we have often viewed as young and impetuous, to help us see the fuller truth. There is a lesson in that, one the ancestors would appreciate. Wisdom can come from unexpected sources. The ceremony continued with formal statements from each of the partner species representatives, pledging responsible use of the ancestral knowledge and respect for Vestian guidance. The event was being broadcast throughout the galaxy, and Miles knew that billions of beings across thousands of worlds were watching this moment unfold. As the formal proceedings concluded, Miles found himself approached by a young Vestian acolyte, her skin glowing with the bright patterns of youth and enthusiasm. "Knowledge-bearer," she said hesitantly, "is it true that you were a maintenance technician before the stones awakened for you?" Miles smiled. "A janitor, actually. I cleaned floors and maintained facilities on Nexus 7 station." The young Vestian's eyes widened. "And now you carry the ancestral wisdom and speak before the High Conclave. It is inspiring. It suggests that any of us might be capable of more than we realize." "That's exactly right," Miles said warmly. "The universe doesn't always recognize our potential based on our titles or positions. Sometimes it sees something in us that we haven't yet seen in ourselves." The acolyte bowed deeply. "Thank you for this lesson, knowledge-bearer. I will remember it." As she moved away, Ambassador Bennett approached, a satisfied expression on her face. "That went well. The initial reports from Earth Central indicate positive reactions across the Galactic Council. You've accomplished in 3 months what our diplomatic corps couldn't manage in 3 centuries." Miles shrugged. "I had help." He tapped his temple, indicating the ancestral knowledge. "Don't sell yourself short," Bennett admonished. "The knowledge may have opened doors, but it's your perspective, your essential Miles Harperness, that's making this work. The Vestians respect you not just for what you know, but for who you are." Before Miles could respond, his communication device chimed with an urgent alert. The small holographic display showed a message from the predecessor Knowledge Initiative's newly established headquarters on Nexus 7. "What is it?" Bennett asked, noting his sudden focused expression. "The team analyzing the activation patterns of the sacred stones has found something," Miles said, scanning the message. "They've identified a recurring signal embedded in the light patterns, coordinates." "Coordinates to what?" Miles looked up, excitement building in his eyes. "To other knowledge repositories. Not just on the known worlds we expected, but on planets throughout the galaxy. Dozens of them, including several in unexplored regions." The predecessors left a map, Bennett realized, hidden in the activation patterns all along. "Not just a map," Miles said as the ancestral knowledge in his mind made connections he hadn't seen before. "An invitation. The coordinates form a specific sequence. They're meant to be visited in a particular order. It's like a pilgrimage route." Elder Thaler joined them, having overheard the conversation. "A journey of understanding, linking all the knowledge repositories into a greater whole. Our theologians have spoken of such a possibility for generations, but it was considered mythical." Miles nodded, the pieces falling into place in his mind. The predecessors didn't just leave isolated repositories. They created a network, a galactic library with branches on dozens of worlds. And if we follow the sequence correctly, we unlock knowledge beyond what any single repository contains, Thaler finished, his skin glowing with excitement. The true legacy of the predecessors. Ambassador Bennett looked between them, grasping the implications. This would require cooperation between species on an unprecedented scale. No single civilization could follow the entire route alone. The distances are too vast, the environments too diverse. Exactly, Miles said. That's the final lesson the predecessors wanted to teach us. The greatest wisdom can only be accessed through cooperation across boundaries. 2 years later, Miles stood on the bridge of the Concordance vessel Shared Wisdom, watching as the massive exploration ship approached the 7th planet in the predecessor sequence. Behind him, a crew comprised of members from 23 different species worked in harmony, each bringing unique perspectives and abilities to their shared mission. The ship itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, Vestian navigation systems, Tauran hull design, Solarian power management, and human interface technology, all working together to create a vessel more advanced than any single species could have produced alone. Entering orbit around Target 7, announced the Meridian Navigator, her crystalline skin refracting the bridge lights. Preliminary scans matched the predecessor signature patterns. Miles nodded, feeling the familiar anticipation that came with each new discovery. The past 2 years had been a whirlwind of exploration and revelation as the Concordance followed the predecessor route from world to world, activating dormant knowledge repositories and assembling the pieces of a vast galactic puzzle. Each repository had contained unique knowledge, specialized information about everything from theoretical physics to biological engineering to philosophical concepts beyond current understanding. But more importantly, each had required different approaches to activation, forcing the diverse crew to combine their perspectives in new ways. Knowledge Bearer, the communications officer called. Incoming transmission from Nexus 7. Priority 1. Put it through, Miles instructed. The holographic display flickered to life, showing Ambassador Bennett, now Concordance Commissioner Bennett, in her office at headquarters. Miles, she said without preamble, the analysis team has completed the pattern recognition on the data from the first 6 repositories. They've confirmed your theory. The predecessors were building towards something big. Miles felt a surge of satisfaction. For months, he'd suspected that the individual repositories weren't just random collections of knowledge but components of a larger whole. What did they find, he asked. Each repository contains a piece of what appears to be a unified theory, a comprehensive framework that integrates physics, consciousness, and dimensional mathematics in ways our scientists are only beginning to comprehend. If the pattern holds, this 7th site should contain the central linking principles. Miles exchanged looks with Elder Thaler, who had become his close friend and advisor during their journey. Then we'd better get down there. Prepare the landing team. Hours later, Miles led a diverse group through an ancient structure buried beneath the surface of the 7th planet. The architecture was unmistakably predecessor in design. Geometric shapes that somehow managed to feel organic, materials that responded to presence and intent rather than physical touch. At the center of the complex, they found what they had been seeking, a chamber containing a massive knowledge repository, far larger than any they had encountered before. Unlike the stone tiles of the Vestian artifacts, this took the form of a crystalline sphere suspended in an energy field, pulsing with internal light. It's beautiful, breathed Lyra, a young human xenoarchaeologist who had joined the expedition 6 months earlier. Her presence had been a welcome addition to the team, her fresh perspective often catching details others missed. And powerful, added Krax, the Tauran security chief. Energy readings are off the charts compared to previous repositories. Miles approached the sphere cautiously. The ancestral knowledge in his mind was practically humming with recognition, yet he sensed this was something beyond even what the Vestian ancestors had known. According to the patterns established at the previous sites, this requires a synchronized activation, he said, studying the chamber. Not just multiple beings, but multiple perspectives focused on a single concept. Elder Thaler nodded. Unity in diversity, the recurring theme of the predecessor teachings. Miles turned to the assembled team. We'll need 7 participants, one from each of the major physiological types represented in the expedition. The team quickly organized themselves. Besides Miles and Elder Thaler, they selected Krax the Tauran, Solia the Meridian, Zeth the Solarian, Nyara the Canopian, and Lyra as the second human representative. Form a circle around the sphere, Miles instructed. Focus your thoughts on the concept of connection, between species, between minds, between perspectives. As they positioned themselves, Miles felt an almost electric anticipation in the air. 2 years of exploration had led to this moment. Whatever the predecessors had wanted to share, they were about to discover it. On my mark, he said. 3, 2, 1 now. 7 hands reached out simultaneously, each touching the sphere from a different angle. For a breathless moment, nothing happened. Then the sphere erupted with light, not the gentle glow of previous repositories, but a brilliant radiance that filled the chamber. Miles felt the now familiar sensation of information flowing into his mind, but with an intensity that momentarily overwhelmed him. Images, concepts, mathematics, histories, not just from the predecessors, but seemingly from countless civilizations across vast spans of time. Knowledge not just from this galaxy, but from others, suggesting the predecessors had achieved intergalactic travel or communication. But most strikingly, Miles perceived a presence, a consciousness within the data that responded to their collective touch. Worthy successors identified. A voice spoke directly into their minds, bypassing language barriers. Final repository protocols initiated. The light from the sphere expanded, enveloping the 7 beings in a cocoon of radiance. Miles felt his consciousness expanding, connecting with the others in the circle in a way that transcended normal communication. He could perceive Thaler's ancient wisdom, Krax's disciplined strength, Solia's crystalline perception of reality, all flowing together into a shared understanding. The predecessors didn't disappear, Miles realized with sudden clarity. They evolved, transcended physical form to become something else entirely. Yes, the presence confirmed. What you call the predecessors were once like you. Diverse beings seeking understanding. We discovered that the greatest wisdom comes not from solitary contemplation, but from the harmonious blending of different perspectives. Through the shared mental space, Miles could feel the others processing this revelation in their own ways. Shock, wonder, skepticism, awe. You've left these repositories as breadcrumbs, Lyra's mind voice observed, leading us to follow your path. Not to follow, but to create your own. The presence corrected. Each species, each civilization must find its unique approach to transcendence. We offer not a destination, but a direction. The sphere's light intensified, and Miles felt the information flow accelerating, filling his mind with concepts and technologies far beyond current galactic understanding. But unlike the overwhelming flood when he first touched the Vestian stones, this knowledge was structured, organized, designed to be integrated gradually as their civilizations developed. The final gift is choice, the presence continued. The knowledge we share can lead to wonders or horrors, depending on how it is used. We chose cooperation across boundaries. We offer the same opportunity to you. As suddenly as it had begun, the immersive experience ended. The sphere's light receded, though it continued to pulse gently in the center of the chamber. The 7 representatives found themselves standing in the circle, physically unchanged but mentally transformed. Miles looked around at his companions, seeing in their eyes the same mixture of awe and determination that he felt. They had been given not just knowledge but purpose, a vision of what could be achieved through genuine cooperation. Did everyone? He began. Yes, Elder Thaler said, his skin glowing with complex patterns Miles had never seen before. We all experienced it. The predecessor legacy. Not just technology, Krax rumbled, his 4 arms spread in a gesture of openness unusual for the typically reserved Tauran. A path forward. Together. In the days that followed, the team worked tirelessly to document and begin processing the vast repository of knowledge they had accessed. The information was too extensive to be fully understood in a single lifetime, or even in a single generation. But the framework was clear, a roadmap for cooperative development that could transform life throughout the galaxy. As the Concordance vessel prepared to return to Nexus 7 with their findings, Miles found himself standing alone in the ship's observation lounge, watching the stars. So much had changed in the 2 years since a simple cleaning assignment had altered the course of his life. "Credit for your thoughts, knowledge bearer?" Lyra asked, joining him at the viewport. Miles smiled at the young archaeologist. "Just reflecting on unexpected journeys. 2 years ago, I was pushing a cleaning cart through service corridors. Now you're helping guide 23 species toward a shared future," she finished for him. "It's quite a promotion. It still feels surreal sometimes," he admitted. "I never wanted to be important. I was content with my life, invisible as it was." Lyra studied him thoughtfully. "Maybe that's exactly why you were the right person. You didn't seek power or recognition. You just wanted to do your job well." "Maybe," Miles agreed. "Though I sometimes miss the simplicity of maintenance work. Problems you could solve with the right tool and a little patience." "You're still doing maintenance work," Lyra pointed out with a smile. "Just on a larger scale. Maintaining cooperation between species, cleaning up diplomatic messes, fixing broken communication." Miles laughed. "I never thought of it that way, but you're right. The skills aren't so different. Observation, problem solving, knowing when to intervene and when to let systems run their course." "See? Once a janitor, always a janitor," Lyra teased, just with a slightly bigger broom. Their conversation was interrupted by Elder Thaler's arrival. The Vestian elder moved with the fluid grace characteristic of his species, though Miles noticed a new vibrancy in his movements since their experience at the repository. "The Council of Concordance has convened via quantum link," Thaler announced. "They await our report." Miles nodded, straightening his diplomatic attire, still a source of mild discomfort after years in a maintenance uniform. "Time to share what we've learned." In the ship's communication center, the holographic projections of 23 representatives formed a circle, mirroring the physical arrangement that had activated the predecessor sphere. Among them was Commissioner Bennett, representing Earth. "Knowledge bearer." The Tauran Prime acknowledged Miles with a respectful incline of his massive head. "We have received your preliminary data packet. The implications are profound." "More than profound," the Solarian luminary added, her bioluminescent form pulsing with excitement. "If the technology concepts are viable, we're looking at a new era of development." Miles raised a hand to temper their enthusiasm. "The knowledge is vast and will take generations to fully implement." But the most important discovery wasn't technological. He looked around the circle of representatives. The predecessors achieved what they did because they learned to truly cooperate across biological and cultural boundaries. Not just diplomatic alliances or trade agreements, but genuine synthesis of different perspectives. "Like the Concordance," suggested the Vestian High Speaker. "A beginning," Miles agreed. But they went further. They found ways to temporarily share consciousness across species barriers, to experience reality through each other's perceptions. That's how they developed technologies we can barely comprehend, by combining cognitive approaches that no single species could achieve alone. A murmur ran through the council as the implications sank in. "And you believe we should pursue this path?" asked the Meridian Facet, her crystalline features refracting the light. "Consciousness sharing across species is unprecedented in our records." "Not entirely unprecedented," Miles corrected gently. "The sacred stones of Vestia were a primitive version of this technology. And what happened at the 7th repository was a more advanced demonstration." He looked to his companions from the activation circle, who nodded their agreement. "The 7 of us experienced it. Not a merging of identities, but an expansion of perspective. I remained fully myself, but I could understand, truly understand, how Thaler perceives color through skin receptors, how Solia experiences time through crystalline vibrations." Commissioner Bennett leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "This would require a level of trust between species that has never existed in the galaxy." Exactly, Miles said. That's the challenge the predecessors are setting before us. Not just to use their knowledge, but to grow beyond our current limitations, together. The discussion continued for hours as the council grappled with the implications. Some representatives were enthusiastic, others cautious, a few openly skeptical. But all recognized that the discovery had changed the galactic landscape irrevocably. Finally, the Tauren Prime spoke again. Knowledge-bearer Harper, Elder Thaler, and all who participated in the activation, you have brought us to a crossroads. The path forward will not be easy, but the potential rewards are undeniable. He raised all four of his massive arms in a formal gesture. The Council of Concordance hereby establishes the Predecessor Integration Initiative, dedicated to the responsible study and implementation of the knowledge you have discovered. We ask that you continue to guide this effort. Miles looked to his companions, receiving nods of agreement, before turning back to the Council. We accept, with one condition. Name it, the Prime responded. That membership in the initiative be open to all sentient species, regardless of their current technological development or political standing. The predecessor's message was one of inclusive cooperation. We should honor that. The council members exchanged glances, and Miles could see some hesitation. Opening advanced knowledge to less developed species carried risks. But after a brief consultation, the Prime nodded. Agreed, with appropriate safeguards. The initiative will be open to all who commit to the principles of responsible cooperation. As the meeting concluded and the holographic representatives faded, Miles felt a sense of completion. The journey that had begun with a simple cleaning assignment had led to this moment, a new direction for galactic civilization. 5 years after the discovery at the 7th Repository, Miles stood on the platform of the newly constructed Concordance Academy on Earth, preparing to address the first graduating class. The massive complex, built with technologies derived from the predecessor knowledge, represented a new era in interspecies education and cooperation. Behind him sat row upon row of graduates, young beings from over 40 different species who had spent years learning not just academic subjects, but how to truly understand each other's perspectives. They had used modified versions of the consciousness-sharing technology, experienced each other's perceptual frameworks, and developed ways of thinking that transcended their individual biological limitations. As Miles looked out at their expectant faces, he felt a surge of pride and hope. This was the real legacy of his unexpected journey, not the knowledge itself, but what these young beings would do with it. Graduates of the first Concordance class, he began, his voice carrying easily through the vast auditorium. 5 years ago, when we discovered the predecessor legacy, we faced a choice: to treat it as merely a technological windfall or to embrace the deeper challenge it represented. He gestured to the diverse assembly before him. You have chosen the more difficult path. You have not just studied together. You have learned to see through each other's eyes, to think with each other's minds. That shared perspective is the true gift of the predecessors. Miles paused, looking to where Elder Thaler sat among the distinguished guests. The Vestian elder nodded encouragingly. When the sacred stones first lit up under my broom, Miles continued, I was just a human janitor, overlooked, underestimated, invisible to the powers that shaped the galaxy. My story could have ended there, with a disciplinary note for disrupting alien artifacts. A ripple of laughter ran through the audience. Instead, it became a reminder that wisdom and potential can be found in unexpected places. That lesson applies not just to individuals, but to entire species. Every civilization, regardless of its technological development or political influence, has unique perspectives to contribute. Miles gestured to the academy around them. This institution stands as a testament to that belief. Here, the traditional hierarchies of galactic politics are set aside in favor of genuine exchange and growth. He looked out at the graduates, making eye contact with as many as possible. As you leave these halls and return to your homeworlds, you carry with you not just knowledge but a new way of being. You are the pioneers of a collaborative consciousness that transcends biological boundaries while preserving individual identity. Miles smiled, remembering his own journey. Some of you will become leaders, others researchers, still others artists or teachers. But whatever path you choose, remember that your greatest strength lies not in what makes you exceptional as individuals, but in your capacity to connect with and understand perspectives different from your own. He stepped back from the podium, feeling that his message had been delivered. But before he could conclude, a voice called out from the audience. "Knowledge bearer," a young Tarn'eth student asked, standing to his full impressive height. "Before we graduate, many of us have wondered, do you ever miss your old life? Do you regret the day the stones lit up under your broom?" Miles smiled, considering the question thoughtfully. "I won't pretend there haven't been moments of doubt. The simplicity of my former life had its own kind of peace. But regret? No." He gazed across the sea of diverse faces. "What I've witnessed in these 5 years, 40 species learning to truly understand each other, technologies advancing at unprecedented rates because of shared perspective, conflicts resolving through genuine empathy rather than force. These outcomes are worth whatever personal comfort I might have sacrificed." Miles gestured to the Academy's central spire, where a replica of the predecessor sphere pulsed with gentle light. "Besides, I never really stopped being a janitor. I still spend my days maintaining systems, cleaning up messes, and making sure things run smoothly, just on a galactic scale now." Laughter rippled through the audience. "The greatest lesson I've learned," Miles continued, "is that there are no ordinary beings. That maintenance worker you pass without noticing, that clerk processing your documents, that server bringing your meal, each carries unique perspectives that might one day transform our understanding of the universe." He smiled at the Tarn'eth student. "So no, I don't regret it. Not for a moment." As the ceremony concluded and the graduates dispersed to celebrate with families and friends, Miles found himself standing with Elder Thaler and Commissioner Bennett on the Academy's observation deck, watching the sunset over Earth's Pacific Ocean. 5 years, Bennett mused. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you were explaining to the security team why you were stuck to a glowing floor tile." Miles chuckled. "That seems like another lifetime now." "In many ways, it was," Elder Thaler observed, his skin glowing with the serene patterns of contentment. "The predecessor records suggest that true evolutionary leaps often begin with single, seemingly random events. Like a janitor's broom touching the right stone at the right moment," Miles said. "Precisely," Thaler agreed. "One small connection that changes everything." As darkness fell and stars began to appear in Earth's sky, Miles felt a profound sense of completion. The journey that had begun with a mundane cleaning assignment had transformed not just his life, but the course of galactic civilization. The knowledge repositories were now accessible to all sentient species who committed to the principles of cooperative advancement. The consciousness-sharing technology was being refined and expanded, creating understanding across boundaries previously thought insurmountable. Most importantly, the old hierarchies that had kept humans and other lesser species on the margins were dissolving, replaced by networks of mutual respect and collaboration. "What's next for you, Miles?" Bennett asked. "The Antares expedition has requested you as their cultural advisor." Miles shook his head. "I think my traveling days are done for now. I'd like to stay here, teaching at the Academy. There's something fitting about returning to Earth, completing the circle." As his friends nodded in understanding, Miles gazed up at the stars, now representing not distant, unreachable points of light, but a connected community of worlds. He had been just a human janitor until the sacred stones lit up under his broom. And that unexpected moment had revealed a universe of possibilities, not just for him, but for all sentient beings seeking wisdom among the stars. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.